Let's talk about another myth related to learning. When we find it easy to call up facts and information that we've learned rapidly, that means we've really learned them, right? And what about when we find things confusing? That's bad, isn't it? Not so fast. Let's look at the difference first between memorization and learning. As Ben Orlin states, memorization is when we're placing greater value on information that can be recalled quickly and easily, versus learning. What separates memorization from learning is a sense of meaning. Some things benefit from memorization. For example, knowing how to read notes on the staff if you're learning to read music. Memorization works either through raw rehearsal, that is, you repeat the thing over and over again. It takes up a lot of time, but it doesn't really require you to think. Or mnemonics, like songs or rhymes, etc. Those are better in that they don't take up as much time, but they don't really mean anything. For example, again, thinking about learning to read music, Every Good Boy Does Fine is a common mnemonic to learn the notes on the lines of the 5-line staff in treble clef. Doesn't actually have anything to do with the notes you would play on an instrument. It's just a key to help you remember those notes. There are alternatives to these that would actually allow you to learn something in a meaningful way. One is just repeated use. When you use something over and over, you remember it, but you didn't set out to memorize it. The memorization just happened as a result of the repeated use. Or building on things you already know. That's different from mnemonics because there's an actual connection between the things, so that means that your connection means something. Here are a couple of concepts to think about. One is the availability heuristic. That is the idea that we place greater value on information that can be recalled quickly and easily. According to Kent Hendricks, there are certain conditions where you're more likely to rely on ease of recall, and those include when you're multitasking instead of focused, when you're a novice instead of an expert, when you're in a position of leadership or feel powerful instead of in a submissive role, and when you feel happy instead of sad. Why does that matter for teaching and learning? Because when faced with a problem that requires nuanced thought or has multiple possible correct answers, if we have some information that comes readily to mind, we often assume it's correct. Or consider the impact of perceptual fluency and retrieval fluency on how well we understand materials versus how well we think we have learned them. As stated in this quote, for example, we know that if you study something hard in spaced sessions, it's harder to process the material the second time, and people think it's counterproductive, said Nate Cornell, a psychologist at Williams College. But the opposite is true. You learn more, even though it feels harder. Fluency is playing a trick on judgment. Now let's get to confusion. When we feel confused, we often feel like we are not learning. But in fact, confusion can actually be a big contributor to learning. To quote John Spencer, confusion has a few surprising benefits. It pushes you to slow down and think deeper. The struggle to figure things out means the learning sticks. Let's check out this definition of confusion from Mary Burns. Confusion is an intellectual and emotional state. It is the feeling of cognitive disequilibrium and emotional discomfort we experience when we encounter difficult problems, when we confront the gap between our own existing skill sets and a task that must be accomplished, when we realize that there are multiple ways, not just one way, to solve a problem or multiple pathways to a solution. Burns goes on to discuss the effects of confusion and how we can channel them into a positive opportunity for learning. Together, these cognitive and emotional elements trigger a fight or flight response in the learner. He or she may lash out, give up, or persist. Persistence, of course, is what we want, but learning how to mentor students toward that goal is hard. It is critical that teachers and professional development providers learn how to help students embrace confusion and persist through the confusion to attain success or learn from failure. As John Spencer notes, not knowing how to solve problems makes us explore more, so we understand things more deeply. Being confused motivates us to figure things out. When people watch simple videos with clear concepts, they tend to believe that they understand it at the deep level, but that's not the case. They're overconfident in their understanding and unaware of what they don't know. They're also less engaged mentally as they watch it. By contrast, when they watch videos with strategic confusion, especially those that push them to make and test a hypothesis, they are convinced that they know very little of the information when, in fact, they are learning it at a deeper level. They also have higher engagement and deeper retention. Confusion has a few surprising benefits. It pushes you to slow down and think deeper. The struggle to figure things out means the learning sticks. Delphine Genin has written about the role of emotions in learning and the importance of understanding epistemic emotions such as surprise, confusion, and curiosity. These emotions are an important part of students' beliefs about learning and truth, and can lead students to think critically. Genin even argues that navigating students into the right emotional state can help them learn more easily. To quote her, Emotions such as confusion can open up mental space for responding to new situations. Managing epistemic emotions can help learners exercise critical thinking by addressing the feelings that arise around facts, but with low risk or mental discomfort. Maya Bialik identifies reasons why we avoid confusion in teaching and curriculum design, including our need to focus on observable outcomes and our belief that the best way to understand any whole is by breaking it down into parts. We all can understand why the former is, on the one hand, necessary at times, but not ideal. The latter seems to be an unassailable fact of learning. However, Bialik notes a few reasons why this is not the case. Students do not begin as empty vessels. Rather, they have already built models for understanding the world. Complex concepts are often complex because they are unintuitive, and simply presenting the pieces to students is often not enough for them to truly integrate the ideas with their existing conceptual frameworks. I recommend you read her piece linked at the end of this presentation for more detail on the 3 ways that she suggests we approach confusing students, but they're listed here on this slide. Let me elaborate a little on the principles outlined here by Mary Burns. Keep it complex refers to the value of complex learning activities like problem-based learning in creating opportunities for learners to overcome challenges and enjoy the learning journey. Along with this, she points out the need for guidance along the way as learners navigate potentially challenging emotions like the epistemic emotions discussed by Genin. This brings us to her second principle. To quote Burns herself, "We can help adult learners examine their own negative feelings and the sources of this negativity, relate these feelings to what the students often feel when facing difficult academic challenges, and then work with them to develop strategies to help students regulate emotions and turn frustration into inquisitiveness and defeat into persistence." She also points out the positive emotions that result from the experience, of course. The third principle can be a tricky one for us to navigate. On the one hand, we know that neurodiverse students, such as those with ADD and those on the autism spectrum, often do best with clearly defined assignments that are broken down into multiple steps. On the other hand, this can be overdone to the point where the students have no agency and do not have the opportunity to make their own choices or solve problems. Finding the right balance is important. The fourth principle is fairly self-explanatory. Make it risky. By creating activities that are complex, we can encourage teachers to be risk takers and in turn encourage their students to do the same. And finally, 5, capture the learning. The learning gains accrued by embracing and overcoming confusion are lost if we do not reflect on the process of working through confusion and how that process contributes to our own cognitive and emotional growth. John Spencer, who I quoted earlier, has shared some additional ideas for embracing confusion in the classroom. Again, I recommend checking out his piece for more detail on these, as well as a lot of thought-provoking materials and examples. Similarly, Delphine Genin provides interesting examples from her own experience in the classroom. Of course, there are times when confusion can be unproductive. Confusion can definitely help us avoid confirmation bias and other types of cognitive bias by pushing us toward inquisitiveness and problem solving and away from easy answers and assumptions. And it can definitely help us avoid being overconfident, which we saw was a cause of errors when we looked at the availability heuristic. However, it's important for us as teachers and as students to admit to and/or recognize confusion when it's occurring. Otherwise, we may leave class feeling frustrated, but unable to pinpoint the source of our frustration. Or we may leave the class feeling that it was a poor attempt at conveying simple information, rather than an attempt to push the learners into inquiry, curiosity, and problem solving. It's probably a good idea to be straightforward and transparent about the nature of your lesson in advance if you want to try to introduce complexity, especially if your students aren't used to it. But to leave you with a quote, "The struggle associated with overcoming confusion helps us to find better strategies for understanding the world." I hope you'll consider ways to make your learning and teaching deeper by accepting some confusion.